When a young, wealthy man suddenly found himself confronted with illness, aging, and death, his framework for understanding the world shattered. Confused and uncertain of anything other than the need to make sense of what he had seen, the young man walked away from the security of his wealth and family to search for answers to the problem of suffering. A search that eventually brought him to a Bodhi tree, where he sat, stilled his mind, and finally found the answer that he had so doggedly been seeking. This, of course, is the story of the Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama. But in a way, it is also the story of all of us, isn't it? We may have been born in poverty rather than wealth. We may have been less sheltered. But in time, we all stumble headfirst into the realities of sickness, aging, and death. We all find ourselves asking questions about life, aging, suffering, and death. In the long struggle to make sense of life, religions have played a leading role in offering answers. As I've mentioned before, my favorite framework for world religions is by Boston University scholar Stephen Prothero. In his book, God is Not One, Prothero suggests that each of the 8 major world religions describes both a problem and a solution to that problem. In Buddhism, that problem is suffering, and the solution is awakening. In Christianity, the problem is sin, and the solution is salvation. In Islam, the problem is pride, and the solution is submission, and so on. While this framework minimizes the nuances within each religious tradition, I like it because it creates a common ground that something is not right in the world, and we might be able to do something about it. None of us escapes this reality. If we were not already reeling from the recent deaths, the pandemic, and climate change, the leaked news from the Supreme Court of the impending decision to overturn Roe versus Wade certainly landed a blow. And if I did not address this news today, I suspect many of you would walk away feeling dissatisfied with the service in some way. Because when major things happen in the world we share, you expect this space, these religious services, to be a place that helps you to make sense of these things. Which is not to say that you come expecting me to give you the answers. In the Unitarian Universalist tradition, we do not look to a single person, nor even a single sacred text for definitive answers on how to think and how to act. Rather, we ask that each of us be responsible for searching for truth, for meaning, for an ethical way of living. My role is to call each of us to this work and hopefully provide some resources along the way. Long before I was a declared Unitarian Universalist, in my own search for understanding life, I had already reached for multiple sources to help me make sense of life. One of those sources was the post-war classic, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think it was assigned to me in college. Anyone else read it? Yeah. Rereading Man's Search for Meaning as an older, more experienced adult felt different, less abstract, more real. Even so, the reality of such suffering still remains far beyond anything in my experience. Being reminded of those atrocities of those death camps rekindled my appreciation for the enormous harm that continues to reverberate. Considering Frankl and the Buddha together was not planned. but the serendipitous outcome of choosing Frankl's text on a day we also chose to honor the Buddha's birthday. And yet, considering their stories, their searches for meaning, side by side, revealed some unexpected insights, such as how both of their stories include the impact of the deprivation of food on the spiritual journey. Early in Frankl's story, he talks about how prisoners would share long, nostalgic conversations about meals, as well as fantasies about what food and drink they would one day share together. He also talks about the role of food in reward and punishment, as food was such a scarce and valuable resource in the camps. And Frankl also tells a story of prisoners setting aside their meager meal when summoned to witness an extraordinary sunset. Food, the simple act of sustaining the life in one's body, was both necessarily central and yet not sufficient to sustain the spirit of a person. In the Buddha's story, he spent 5 or 6 years living an ascetic life when he first left his family. According to a short biography of the Buddha by Rick Fields, Siddhartha, quote, drove himself mercilessly, eating only a single grain of rice in a day, pitting mind against body, his ribs stuck through his wasted flesh, and he seemed more dead than alive, end quote. Reading this immediately after reading Frankl's account of the starvation in the death camps was startling. And yet, unlike the camp prisoners, Siddhartha had a choice. And when he did choose to eat more, his 5 companions left him. Now alone, Siddhartha encountered a woman, Sujata, who offered him milk and honey to nourish his body and restore his health. Only then did Siddhartha sit beneath the Bodhi tree and find enlightenment, becoming the Buddha. There are many differences, of course, in the stories of the Buddha and Frankl. And yet I find this overlapping of food, starvation, and seeking meaning to be significant. Whereas Frankl acknowledges the importance of food and bodily sustenance, he also argues that meaning comes not from sustaining the body, but by feeding the inner self, the mind. And the Buddha finds spiritual enlightenment not by harming the body through intentional starvation, but only after nurturing his body. In both stories, food and bodily health is necessary but not sufficient to a meaningful life. This wending together of our bodily realities with our search for meaning matters in a world where women's bodily autonomy is under attack and the health of the climate weakens our food and water systems. The search for meaning is not abstracted from our bodily organic existence. The search for meaning is part of these experiences that are breaking our hearts, fueling our fears, and fanning our anger. Indeed, Frankl insists that the search for meaning is not abstract or general. He writes, quote, questions about the meaning of life can never be answered by sweeping statements. Life does not mean something vague, but something very real and concrete, just as life's tasks are also very real and concrete. In this way, there is no one general abstract meaning of life for all of humanity. Rather, there is only what life asks each of us in our place, our time, our context of relationships with particular people. I reflected on Frankel's argument on Friday as I walked along the Merrimack River at the Salisbury Beach State Reservation. The tide was low, and the sand showed streaks of purple from the remains of shells, which contrasted with the vibrant greens growing on the exposed rocks. Wow, beautiful, I thought. This is a meaningful moment. Perhaps what Frankel is trying to do is to get us to notice the meaningful moments. The glorious sunset reflected in the muddy puddles of Auschwitz, the small kindnesses of an SS commander, the gift of remembering a beloved and anticipating a sweet reunion someday to help get through a horrible, horrible day. Perhaps a meaningful life is made through moments that connect us with people we love, with activities that matter to us, and with values such as kindness, dignity, or justice that we hold dear. Perhaps meaning is made by stringing together meaningful moments of real, concrete interactions throughout our lives. Frankel likens the specificity of finding meaning to a game of chess. There is no such thing as the best move without considering the multiple factors of game and opponent. So also each of us must find or make our own meaningful life by the choices we make and how we respond to the particularities of our own lives. Such an approach fits well with the UU outlook that promotes and affirms a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It also fits with the First Parish mission, which calls us to search for meaning by creating opportunities for all ages to explore values and principles that orient and guide us through life. In other words, one of the reasons we exist as an institution is to be a place where people can come with their questions and their search for meaning. We do not offer definitive answers for all of humanity, but we seek to create opportunities for seeking out, reflecting upon, and hopefully experiencing meaningful moments. This will look different for each of us. Some of us will show up for book groups while others make cookies for memorial services. Some will organize us for public protests, and others may lead us in quiet meditation. In choosing actions or tasks that feel meaningful to us, we manifest our values and our sense of purpose in our lives. These do not need to be grand projects of a meaningful life. They can be simple, concrete tasks akin to the next best move available to us on the chessboard of life. In other words, meaning can be found by responding to what life is asking of us in any given moment. Poet Thomas Gunn writes, "At worst, one is in motion, and at best, reaching no absolute in which to rest, one is always nearer by not keeping still." Meaning is not an abstract absolute that one finds and defines for all time, for all humanity. Rather, meaning is found through the motion of living, of listening to what life is asking of me in this place, this moment. This movement of responding to life puts us nearer to meaningful living. Meaning is found within this bodily, organic world that is never still, and where real bodies face harm from radical, aggressive laws, where water is increasingly scarce, where the destruction of wheat fields by war and heat threatens the starvation of bodies. Meaning is found here, where we wrestle together with these concrete issues and consider what particular moves we might be able to make in response. And meaning is also found here, when we cultivate resources for enduring what we might not be able to change, but must figure out how to live with. As a congregation, our mission includes supporting one another in this search for meaning that is always nearer, never still. Such work remains not only relevant, but pressing in this moment and this place. May we each listen for what life is asking of us, of me, and this one particular life we have to live. So may it be. Amen.